In this video, I want to talk about an acquisition, which is also a liquidity event, by the way. It's not just bankruptcy where liquidation happens, it also happens during an acquisition. What happens during an acquisition, and how do investors get paid, and how a company is valued, right? I think we've only briefly touched upon valuations, and this is a topic I want to it's an art, not a science, and I want to run you through why. So, we have the assets of the company, and we're not going to write anything inside it. Let's just assume the left side is assets, and we have the stakeholders of the company. During an acquisition, the same process takes place as if it were a bankruptcy, which is, say the acquisition amount is 30 crores, and the amount of capital invested is, say, 10 crores before the acquisition. What would happen is this 30 crores would be split amongst all the stakeholders. First, the liquidation preference takes place in order of seniority, which is first the investors get their money back. If it's a 1x liquidation, then they get at least one time their money back. So that initial, say the investors had invested 10 crores in the company. First, 10 crores get kicked out and given to the investors according to their seniority. Then the rest of the money, which is remaining after the liquidation preference is given out, is the split of the equity among the investors. This is when the cap table gets split out. What happens is the acquiring company, say a Yahoo comes tomorrow. I mean, Yahoo is broke, they can't afford anybody, but say a Microsoft comes tomorrow and decides to buy a company out. They will come in and they will actually write a check for a 30 crore or whatever. And this goes straight to the company. And this, check that came in is split among the different shareholders in the company. Now, I want to have, a discussion, and this is obviously going to be my perspective. I'm also going to tell you the industry perspective on this, is how do you actually value a company? How do you know what this side of the company is worth? Is it 10 crores? Is it 30 crores? And the answer is a company is only worth as much as somebody is willing to pay for it. Right? If a VC comes in and says a company is worth 100 crores, then it is actually worth 100 crores because if he's willing to put money on the line. There is a funny example, and this is something that, DHH spoke about a long time ago, which is if I buy 0.0000001% of a company for, say, $1,000, then the company becomes extremely valuable because somebody still made a purchase, but at a very, very high price. And this is the weird thing about the crypto world where, one person makes a transaction for a really high price, but the next person makes a transaction for a really low price, right? So nobody has the accurate answer of what a company is really worth. All of this, and I'm going to write this word here, is speculative. The person who comes up with the valuation of the company, usually an accountant, is a person who looks at all of those things and values those things. So he says, this is the idea of the company. I think it's worth, X amount because there was another clothes shopping company and, a digital store, and they had this kind of valuation. So I think the idea is valued at this much. The revenues of the company are this much today, but because we're an early stage company, we think the revenues are going to 10x over the next 2 years. Now, these are all assumptions. And surprisingly, these assumptions are held in good faith, right? A lot of people actually believe these assumptions while investing in a company. So when we're selling JobsBuy, we had multiple acquirers, we had multiple people we were going to, and one of the companies from Delhi, they wanted to do a merger more than an acquisition. They wanted to have us have 10% of their entire company. They were a pretty big company. And they had to value both our company as well as theirs. And during that process, both our CA as well as their CA ended up valuing both companies because you have to do that during a merger. And the differences between the valuations that we came up with and that they came up with were 7x. We had come up with a valuation of a few 100 crores for their company, but they were valuing it at 7 times as much. Right? Which is how valuations work. As an accountant or an investment banker, it's easy to not just say that, it's going to be a 10x increase in revenues next year. It's also easy for you to say it's going to be a 100x and find a way to justify it. And, I'm a scientist, right? If you ask me to choose between being an artist and a scientist, I would choose to be a scientist. As a scientist, you arrive on an answer. You don't go with a predetermined answer. You run experiments to find out the answer. Whereas with an artist, in your head, you have an answer, and you try to work out that answer on a piece of paper. And what I've seen is that during valuations, there are many methods to value a company. One of the most interesting ones is called discounted cash flow, DCF. I don't know if that looks like a D, but it's a DCF. And in my honest opinion, a DCF is so open to manipulation with like a small tweak in variables. You can change the complete valuation of a company. And it's a lot of neighbor peeking, right? In an exam, you look into your neighbor's paper and you say, okay, that person has this answer, so I'm going to write that down. There's a lot of that in DCF. You say, oh, the average, premium for these type of companies, for example, if it's AI, it's a little higher. But at the end of the day, those companies go bankrupt as well. So it is very, very difficult to really value a company. And the right way to look at valuations is what you think your company is worth, looking at not just other companies, but also what you realistically think the revenues are. Because like I mentioned, it is very possible for you to get down round in the future if you have too high a valuation. So optimizing valuation doesn't mean getting the highest valuation possible, even though some of your investors might be disappointed. It is more about getting the right kind of valuation so that you can get that next round of capital without too many people saying no about it being too expensive. Remember, the only reason you think an iPhone is 50,000 rupees versus 25,000 rupees, because you and Apple Inc. agree that an iPhone is 50,000 rupees or 60,000 rupees at the time of purchase, right? So the minute you make that purchase, you're saying, okay, an Apple iPhone is 50,000 rupees. And it works the exact same way with a company. When somebody wants to buy 10% of the company, they have to first value the entire company. And if you and them agree on a price, then it's fine. Now, a lot of first-time founders or even second-time founders, what I've seen is that they try to optimize their valuation too much, or they try to increase their valuation. They argue about valuations. My only suggestion to you, especially if you're a beginner, is don't try to optimize the valuation too much, right? Just go with the best valuation, try to work with nice people, because at the end of the day, during an exit event, you might end up with 5% less or 7% less, which is not a big deal, especially if you're selling in the millions of dollars. Instead, the journey is more important. So if you're working with a bunch of people that you're not really interested in working with, who are just going to call you and annoy you for no reason and don't give you the creative space and freedom, it's a better idea not to work with them. At Avalon, when we make investments, and of course we make small investments, but when we make investments, we make it very clear that we stay out of the entrepreneur's way, right? We let them run the company the way they want to, and we usually get a premium for that. Right? We help them in any way possible. We build the technology sometimes, but we get a premium for the fact that we stay out of these entrepreneurs' way. In this seniority graph, the entrepreneur is last, right? And the entrepreneur gets his, or the founder gets his kind of cut after everybody else. This person takes an incredible amount of risk, and only today are people realizing the real amount of risk that an entrepreneur takes in the startup journey. So don't ever forget that. Don't worry about the 7 or 8% difference, if you sold your company. Instead, worry about the downside. How will your investors take it if your company crashes and burns, right? So don't optimize too much for valuation. Optimize for trying to build a good company with good people involved so that you don't spend sleepless nights. You can always build another company later. Now, we're also talking about this acquisitions event. And a lot of you are thinking, I want to run my company forever. I want to build one company and run that till the end of time. And, I used to think the same way, but, then reality hits and you realize that, maybe you want to sell a company and move on. You want to build other things in the future. You want to work on multiple things. And that is always going to happen. What I've noticed is that if something is forever, a lot of fights happen and it just becomes a lot of passive aggressive kind of behavior. Whereas if everyone is oriented towards, selling a company in 3 or 4 or 10 years even, then everybody is aligned to put their differences aside, because they'll be in their heads, they're always like, I just have to tolerate this for another 4 or 5 years, give my best, and then I move on. Right? So moving on is not such a bad thing. In fact, it gives everybody an end goal to work towards. So try to work towards an acquisition. An IPO is, you've got to be super lucky to actually go see an IPO. And if you are in that place, then you don't need these videos. But the odds are that you will most likely see an acquisition rather than an IPO. Actually, the odds say that you will fail, but hopefully with Meta Startup, the chances of your failure drop. And there are higher chances of you being profitable enough to warrant an acquisition. So that's what we're going to look towards. We're going to look towards adding value, this value that we spoke about, to a larger company with everything that we bring. Right? So we're serving it up on a platter for a bigger company and then making payday. That's the goal of Meta Startup. An IPO, there are a lot of complexities at that stage. And if you're super lucky, who knows? That's the dream. And it's also a dream for all Avalon companies, right? Can we IPO? But it's less realistic than you think it is. So let's go towards the acquisition idea. You can still make a ridiculous amount of money and you can add a ridiculous amount of value and still have a lot of fun while doing it.